You can tell a lot about a fantasy world by looking at its map. Mostly what places exist and where they are relative to other places, but also how the creator plans to explore them. If a story presents you with a map of a whole continent or globe, you can expect to see its characters embark on long journeys full of wildly varied sights and sounds as they get embroiled in large-scale, world-shaking events. A more detailed map of a smaller region, like say the trade route between Pazlo and Yoitsu that Holo and Lawrence follow in Spice and Wolf, implies a tighter focus, plots driven by organizational and interpersonal conflicts rather than geopolitical ones, locations painted with fine enough brushwork to give each town and city a distinct identity from its neighbors, in contrast to the broader strokes cultural differences that separate nations in stories on a continental or global scale. As a general rule of thumb, the smaller a fantasy map is relative to the length of the story to which it's attached, the more you can expect to learn about whatever happens to be on it. Knowing that, the map included with each part of Ascendance of a Bookworm's 700-plus page first volume, which depicts one district of one city and its most immediate surroundings, plus the full contents of a single apartment, is kind of intimidating. To tell a fantasy story of that scope on that scale requires obsessive attention to detail. The construction of your world must be immaculate right down to the embellishments and joinery, because you're asking your audience to examine it under a microscope, essentially. Bookworm's world has history, religion, and economy, unique flora and fauna, and a complex social order built around an equally complex magic system. All of which we see from the perspective of ordinary citizens whose daily lives and mindsets are shaped directly by it. It's an intimate, uncompromisingly realistic take on world building that makes for thoroughly immersive viewing and even more immersive reading, which you can experience for yourself through today's sponsor, Bookwalker, but more of that later. It is, of course, only to be expected that a light novel or manga will build its world with greater depth and breadth than a rigidly paced, budget-limited anime adaptation ever could, but if you're interested in the art of world building, and if you're not, I don't know why you clicked on this video, then I can't recommend the Bookworm light novels in particular highly enough. Worldviews and cultural attitudes are as important here as hard facts and lore, and even with adept visual storytelling, there's only so much thought process that can be conveyed without narration. Which is not to say that the anime is a slouch in that department. Even under the limits of its medium and production, it has managed to give me a greater understanding of what life in its world is really like and how people there think than fantasy series several times its length. In his landmark philosophical treatise, The Shandification of Fallout, link in the doobly-doo, the great thinker Bobby the Tongue laid out a key question for gauging the fidelity of fictional worlds at a glance. What do they eat? Any world builder concerned with verisimilitude, Mr. B. Tongue argues, will seek to establish how the people and civilizations in their world sustain themselves, what and where they farm and/or forage. It's rarely plot-relevant info, but it goes a long way to making a world feel real. This is the third question that Bookworm poses and answers for its audience, right after, are there any books in this house, and what can mine do about her hair getting in her face? Her mom takes her to a market in the town center, where farmers and merchants from outside the city walls come to hawk their wares. With winter approaching, the market is full of meat and preserves, but when it reopens in the spring, it'll look very different. Most poor families can't get by on wages alone, though, so their children will go out foraging in the local forest to help pick up the slack and also get firewood. Winter presents the rare opportunity to harvest perus, odd coconut-like fruit that grow on trees made of ice in the early morning before disappearing in the mild heat of the midday sun. Also, once a year, commoners will gather at local farms for a big communal pig slaughtering festival where everyone gets to take home their share of smoked and dried meat. With these non-perishables in storage, families can hunker down in their homes and work on handicrafts, trinkets to be sold for extra cash come spring, clothes to wear for the coming year, that sort of thing. When the snow thaws, adults head back to their jobs at guild-associated workshops, while children who've come of age, that age being 7, get ready to start apprenticeships that will define their future careers, and the younger ones return to foraging, helping out however they can. Many fantasy stories help you develop an understanding of the history and political and economic systems that drive their worlds, but few let you get so familiar with the rhythms of everyday life there. And this is just what the show manages to establish about a single season in the 3 episodes or so it takes for mine to achieve basic literacy. And diving into such mundane minutiae would be the height of authorial self-indulgence, were it not ultimately the driving point of the entire story. Bookworm is ostensibly about Mine's quest to live a life surrounded by books in a world without paper or printing presses, but that's mostly just a motivation for her to push against the rigid class system and slightly softer cultural assumptions that define what her life in this world can and cannot be. The series is really about people and the way the society they grow up in and their position within it shapes their perspectives, attitudes, and ambitions in life. Before Mine and Lutz start their papermaking business, for instance, the simple idea of saving money in a secure external location is utterly foreign to him, and to both of their families, which makes sense. Before she started inventing shit, they rarely had spare cash on hand to begin with, and when they did, it was in small enough quantities to safely stash away in hidey holes within their homes. The idea of having so much that it's not safe to keep around is unfathomable to them. The series leverages Mine's, or rather Urano Motosu's, position as an isekai outsider to highlight the many subtleties like this that give the city of Ehrenfest a unique sense of place and culture. That fresh perspective does often help her friends and family see past the perceived limitations of their respective lots in life, but it also puts her at a bit of a disadvantage in social situations, especially as she and Lutz enter the world of trade and business, where manners are of prime importance. Though a lot of people do give her a limited free pass just for being a well-spoken 6-year-old, she has to spend a not insignificant amount of time unlearning the Japanese cultural norm of bowing one's head in apology. This is a society that values eye contact, and her impulse to prostrate herself when she begs ends up costing her the first chance she gets to touch a book, simply because it makes her seem weird and untrustworthy to the merchant who owns it. That specific action also has a religious connotation in this world, which may have been a factor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the more subtle things Mine must learn in the first season is how to say no, simply and directly, when laying out the terms of a business deal. In Japanese culture, a simple, curt denial is generally seen as impolite, so it's common etiquette to respond to unwanted requests with uncertainty, giving the other party a chance to back down gracefully. To a Europe-ish businesswoman like Frida, though, that sounds like haggling and only encourages her to make a pushier offer. Are you beginning to see what I mean when I say that map was scary? Miya Kazuki has crafted Bookworm's world in painstaking enough detail to make this kind of nuanced cross-cultural miscommunication possible. And it doesn't just stop with the clash between Tokyo and Ehrenfest. After she becomes an apprentice priestess in Season 2, Mine needs to learn a whole new set of norms and behaviors to fit in with the nobility at the church, and her attendants likewise struggle to avoid standing out when they're with her downtown. The fidelity in which this world is rendered is frankly ridiculous, but it's also warranted given how much of the plot is driven by carefully balanced negotiations and deceptions where the subtleties really matter. Paying attention to this information makes the action of the story much more engaging, and also delights the nerd in me to no end. I can tell you how folks in this city count on their fingers, German style, starting with the thumb. I can even tell you how downtown Ehrenfest smells. Like downtown San Francisco. That is to say, like shit. Also animal blood, if the market's open, but mostly shit, because the extent of indoor sewage disposal in this part of the world is the classic combo of chamber pot and window, and that turns out to be plot important. The smell really catches Mine off guard when she first steps out into the streets with her mother to shop, though with time she does get used to it. In a side story OVA released between seasons, Eustachius, a noble sent by the church to spy on Mine before she's formally inducted as a priestess, also balks at the smell. His green-haired companion Eckerd is rendered bedridden by his pathetic inability to stomach it. Their reactions differ from Mine's in that they hold their noses up not just at the place, but the people for letting it get that way. But of course, it's really their fault, or at least the fault of their class in aggregate. That they're not used to this smell is proof that better methods of waste management do exist in this world. Possibly plumbing, but more likely some solution involving the magic that the world's nobility has claimed as its sole domain. Whether nobles have special poop portals that leave their leavings elsewhere, or else they just shit on the floor and zap it away Harry Potter style, that magic technology has not yet been disseminated to the masses. Mine's friends, family, and neighbors live in squalor because they've never been given another option. They likely don't even know one exists. Ignorant populations are much easier to control, after all, and easier to look down on. As part of his investigation, Eustachius disguises himself as a farmer by dressing up in filthy rags, hunching his back, and adopting an exaggerated Hick dialect, a performance Eckerd finds completely convincing. The people he's trying to fool, on the other hand, less so. Everyone he talks to in town immediately sees through his folksy idiot act and overly shabby outfit, save for a few literal children who take an extra minute or so to catch on. And how could they not? His line of questioning is so stupidly direct, his disguise so mismatched to his surroundings, and the backstory used to justify it so flimsy and unconvincing that you'd have to be a complete idiot to think it would fool anyone. Or you'd have to think the people you're fooling are complete idiots. Eustachius really has no less contempt for the poor than Eckerd does. He's just slightly better at hiding it. All of this can be inferred from just a short 15-minute vignette because the show has done such thorough legwork in establishing what the common folk of Ehrenfest are really like. So it's immediately obvious how unlike them Eustachius's minstrel act really is. We know how they talk, we know how they dress themselves, we know where and how they conduct what kinds of business. So all it takes is one side-eyed glance from Lutz's mom and a single line about how farmers don't come round these parts for us to instantly understand that this plan is doomed to failure. But neither noble can see it, because they're really just as ignorant about the commoners' way of life as the commoners are about the nobles. Though in their case, it's by choice. The nobles of Ehrenfest prefer the struggles of the peasantry be kept out of sight and mind, locked away outside their gate, not dissimilar to how the church treats a certain other smelly, unfortunate place that the blue robes can't be bothered with. The poor are encouraged to view their unseen masters in much the same way. Even Mine's father, a soldier, is utterly unconcerned with a coup in the capital that transpired a few years back. He thinks it's their business, not his. And considering what Thule says in episode 14 about common folk being cut down for simply looking at nobles the wrong way, and the way the high priest confirms it, you can hardly blame him for wanting to keep his distance. But even as a rarely seen, far-off source of fear, the nobility does harm to the common people on a daily basis by denying them opportunities, tools, and even basic information about the way their world works. Beyond how to read and write, I mean. It takes Mine 7 episodes to learn that magic exists in this world at all. And she only gets the opportunity because Otto introduces her to his merchant brother-in-law, Benno, who does business with noble clientele. In this moment, all of a sudden, it's like she's stepped into a wholly different world. That same sensation is felt again when she enters the church for her baptism and is treated to an absolutely massive lore dump about the world's pantheon via the Holy Scriptures. Also, the fact that the church prays with the Glicoman pose followed by a Dogeza bow heavily implies that its founder was a fellow victim of isekaitis, but that's kind of beside the point. By controlling where and when we learn what key facts about its world, Bookworm is able to convey the class divisions that define it on a subconscious level, long before the High Priest starts treating Gunter and Effa like something he found on his shoe. And this imbalance in the distribution of knowledge has real real, potentially deadly consequences. The chief opposing force of the first season's plot is a mysterious fever that overtakes Mine's frail body at inopportune moments, hitting her hardest when her bookmaking efforts are hampered and her frustration spikes, or she otherwise contemplates giving up. But all she knows about it is what she's learned from experience. Her family has no idea what's causing it. It's only in episode 6, after she meets Benno, that she learns the name of her disease, the Devouring, which, as it turns out, isn't a disease at all. It's merely a symptom of being born with excess mana, one that's easily treated with the right tools. But those tools are magical items, which are for noble use only, except when lending merchants a magical contract or lock can help protect their profits, that is. And besides that, the existence of peasants with magic is inconvenient to a noble class that's painted magical ability as a sign of their inherent right to rule. So even though they could easily save kids with the Devouring by asking them to donate mana to the church, and that would also solve a mana deficit that's threatening the town's future harvests, they just don't. They don't even tell them what's killing them. They do extend a slim lifeline to a lucky few lower-class business partners, like Frida's grandfather, the Guildmaster, by selling them defective magical items, but they do so at an enormous markup, with the expectation that once they come of age, kids with the Devouring will submit to a life of servitude under a noble in exchange for the privilege of not dying. And again, they're the lucky ones. The nobles would rather let countless children perish from a preventable ailment, or maybe inadvertently force-choke their families to death in a magically enhanced temper tantrum, than risk upsetting the one-sided status quo that makes their lives of excess possible. And if that strikes you as cartoonishly, unrealistically wicked, well, you probably haven't been watching much news lately. Crucially, though, most of the nobles we meet aren't framed as being inherently evil, per se. They're just uncaring, selfish, and ignorant. Attitudes that are as much a product of their own experiences with the class system as the attitudes of Mine's family are of theirs. Nobles in this society are kept out of contact with commoners, which increases the sense of otherness that divides them, and they're pushed to compete with one another, especially their closest relatives, for status and wealth. Those who are lucky get to inherit their family's power. Those who aren't are sent to work at the church. It's a cutthroat, backstabbing society that produces cutthroat, backstabbing people. Even those who do genuinely care for the plight of others, like the head priest, are pressured to hide their true feelings and uphold the social order, or else leave themselves vulnerable to usurpation. It's little wonder that the orphans these people raise to be their gray-robed slaves with extra steps mimic this scheming and self-interest, especially when they're made to compete with each other just for the chance to eat. Keep in mind, I'm still working my way through that first volume. All of this is just what I've been able to surmise from the 4.5 episodes the series has thus far dedicated to exploring the nobility-adjacent culture and internal politics of the church. Mine really is stepping into a new world in this new season, and given the slow burn nature of this series, it's safe to say that we've barely scratched its surface. And that's just the world of the temple. The castle and noble quarter are a whole other world unto themselves that the series has only hinted at so far. This kind of storytelling may not be as obviously thrilling as grand, globe-trotting adventures full of monsters and magic and big epic battles, but to me, it's no less exciting to see a picture of an unreal place painted in such exquisite and believable detail. The questions of why a world is the way it is and how that affects the people who live there are endlessly fascinating, and there's just as much drama and danger to be found in the streets of a single city as there is in an entire nation, if you know how to look for it. Or if you're a crazy person like Eiichiro Oda, you can do both and spend 2 decades of your life writing the same manga, but that's a topic for several other videos. If what I've talked about today intrigues you and you haven't yet watched Bookworm, well, you know what to do. But also, I must reiterate that this video is based almost entirely on the anime, and there are many deeper layers of lore and characterization to be found in the source material, which you can read on Bookwalker. Bookwalker, if you didn't know, is Kadokawa's official ebook service, where you can read hundreds of English-language manga and light novels on your device of choice. Right now, they've got a big promotion running to celebrate the second season of Bookworm. If you buy any volume of the light novel or its manga adaptation before May 6th, you'll get 30% of your purchase back in Bookwalker coins, and on top of that, the newly released Part 2 Volume 3 comes with a 30-day Crunchyroll Premium subscription, so you can binge the anime and books back to back. If you use the promo code BASEMENT when you check out for a 600 yen discount, you can have the subscription and the book for a scant $2. Oh, and if you're watching this before the end of April, the first volumes of the manga and light novel are also available totally free as part of Bookwalker's I Couldn't Go Outside So I Just Stayed In and Read Light Novels All Day promotion, along with Infinite Dendrogram and some other good stuff, but you'll have to pay to keep reading after the 30th, so get on those quick and brush up on your speed reading skills, I guess. Links to both promotions can be found in the doobly-doo, and don't forget that promo code BASEMENT can be used to get a discount on any book that might catch your eye. Before you click away though, let me know down below what other anime, and other media in general, impressed you most with their world building and why. And while you're down there, there's some buttons, they do things, most of which help me out, and I always appreciate it when you guys click some combination of them, so you know. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.